In this video, I'm going to show you how to recognize the toxic game a narcissist plays, how to understand how they play it and how the game is played, and finally, how to break the game successfully. Let's take an example. Let's imagine that you're going to dinner with another person, and just before you arrive or on your way there, all of a sudden, a fight breaks out. Maybe the person brings up some kind of grievance, maybe they talk about a sensitive topic just before you arrive, maybe they just shut down and they don't say anything and you feel that something strange is going on and they start getting really edgy with you. But maybe what they're trying to do is put you in a bad mood so that you ruin the moment, and they're simply gaming you, they're simply playing you to produce an outcome that upsets you and that they enjoy. Let's try to change that with this video. In a game, you've got two players. The way this game is played is that the different types of interactions and movements you can have. The first one is the relaxed kind of interaction. This is the kind of game that is pleasant to play, that's supposed to be a win-win. Now there's a second game that can happen, a game with tension. In a healthy relationship, it's important to have both of them. The relaxed part, of course, is when everything is going well, and tension is when you might be having different objectives and need to work through various issues. Some people don't want to engage in tense exchanges, and it's their right not to, but then if issues arise, then they are just doormats and are walked over. In a healthy relationship, you're willing to engage in tension if necessary, and the right way to move to a relaxed state is specifically after getting closure. And conversely, when we move from a state of being relaxed to a state of tension, there's some element of disruption. If you look at the different moves players have available, there is R, being relaxed, D for disruption, T for being tense, and C for closure. And any of the players can play one move or the other in various sequences. So if we map this out exactly like in a board game, we can look at the patterns of play. And these dynamics can go back and forth, of course, through various stages of the relationship. Now if we look at an unhealthy relationship, we notice here that the disruption occurs on one side. The main thing is that closure is missing. The person switched back from being tense to being relaxed without closure that is recognized. That's the first thing. Coming back here, back to tension, there's a disruption, and back to being relaxed, there's no closure. So if we go back to the example of going to dinner, both people are relaxed. At one point on the way, some element of tension arrives. When you arrive for the dinner, you are tense, naturally, and they act as though nothing happened. They're completely relaxed, which makes you look completely crazy. Then you bring it up again that you were upset and there was no closure, which bothers you, which makes them tense again. You remain tense, and then they act as though you're crazy. And as you look for closure, they're refusing to give you closure. Of course, this is one of the traps of trying to look for closure from someone else, whereas ideally the closure comes from inside, and if the other person is unhinged, we recognize it and we don't turn to an unhinged person for our peace of mind. Now, if you look at your history with this person, I'd be interested to see, where does the disruption usually occur? Is it usually coming from the other person? Or is it usually coming from you? And once you've identified the disruption, who is seemingly making the biggest efforts to get closure? Is it equal? Or is it rather one person, you, who's trying to get closure, and the other person who's trying to produce disruption? Remember that a change from tension to being relaxed without closure is simply another form of disruption. In a healthy relationship, people typically don't really enjoy the tension. They would rather move back to a situation of being relaxed because it's more pleasant for them and for the other person. They will be putting effort into trying to find closure to move back to being relaxed. So proper closure. Unhealthy people enjoy this tension. They enjoy the situation, and the other thing they enjoy is seeing the person make the efforts to produce closure, because all they have to do is break that effort of closure and they can continue the agony and the pain. They also enjoy creating the disruption because that gives them power. How do they create the disruption? It's actually rather easy. All they have to do is find the other person's trigger points, upset them, trigger them into reacting, and that gives them power. That's one of the reasons why healing is so important. Once we have healed and we remove the trigger points and we're less easily triggered, we're much harder to manipulate. So now that we've understood it and identified it, what do we do about it? I recommend that you pay attention to 3 different elements. First of all, pay attention to seeing who does the disrupting and who looks for the closure. in a serious manner. Number 2, I suggest you pay attention to how you feel when there is an element of tension. Once you recognize how you feel, you can recognize when you are in the tense situation, when the dynamic has shifted from being relaxed to being tense. Quite often we don't notice it. All of a sudden we realize it, and it can be very strange because we don't see things gradually moving there. That's sometimes because they didn't gradually move there and we're simply being tricked. In a normal healthy dynamic, tension escalates gradually and then we address it when we're ready to address it. When things occur out of the blue, maybe it's not a normal healthy dynamic, and maybe the whole goal is to create more confusion so that we're vulnerable. So identify when you are feeling the tension so you can understand what situation you really are in. And then identify what your tense reaction is. How do you spontaneously react? This is often a knee-jerk reaction you have. Once you identify your knee-jerk reaction, you can observe it when it happens, or preferably before it even happens. If you're able to realize how you're acting naturally, that gives you more power, puts you more in control, and that's better for you and for your peace of mind. Once you've done this, there's something else you can do. Before we change anything in a dynamic with a toxic person, we have to assess the level of danger that we're running. Toxic people can hurt us physically, psychologically, emotionally, and socially. Before you make any changes, I highly suggest that you think about how they can hurt you and you preempt the damage they can do to make sure you stay safe. If you'd like to find out more about this, I have a video that talks about it. I suggest you watch it if you haven't watched it. You might find some ideas that will be helpful. Once you've done this, there's something else you can do, which is change your reaction. Of course, if the situation is tense, acting relaxed doesn't really work, it's not very natural, but there's a better solution. And this is where we have to understand the narcissist's game. What is the goal of the narcissist? What do they want? What are the points that they collect when they play these games? They typically want your energy and your attention. You can imagine they keep count, and their goal is to get as much as possible. And every time you get upset, they get more energy, more attention, and that encourages them to continue. You've got the choice of giving them more energy and more attention and more emotions, and you have the option of depriving them of it, of doing nothing. And this reaction would be neutral. That's exactly what grey stone or grey rock is. You don't give them any attention, you just shut down. When you shut down, there's a high likelihood that they will try to make things tense again. And the solution for you is to close down again. Don't show emotions, don't react, don't argue, don't try to make sense of things, don't explain, don't engage. Just shut down. This adds a new move to the moves you can play as a player, the neutral move. When you play the neutral move, you're basically breaking the game of the narcissist. So if we follow the same sequence as before, we have relaxed, disruption, tension, and instead of tension, neutral. Their reaction is probably going to be tension, and you continue playing neutral until they are relaxed again. This might of course take a while because they're not likely to want to move back to being relaxed. They're likely to be really upset, to try to create more tension, to try to break you. And why wouldn't they? If it's worked in the past, why change tactics that have worked well so far? What is at stake though is your peace of mind. So you can go back to being relaxed. You can try to seek closure. But when you seek closure from the other person, that gives away power. This can work if the person is healthy and well-intentioned, but if they're toxic, they're just going to use it against you. So quite often, seeking closure from another person doesn't make much sense. It can be much easier to simply observe how they act, see if it works for you. If it does, it's great. And if it doesn't, then maybe move on. Now, of course, them being tense is going to be quite unpleasant. So there's one way of defending yourself that can work quite nicely, which is you tie in your neutral reaction to their disruption or their tension. When you bring up these topics, I shut down. When you talk to me this way, I shut down. I'm sorry. I'm saying I'm sorry, by the way, is a great way to introduce anything like this. I'm really sorry. The way the conversation went just doesn't make me want to engage. I'm sorry. I see you're in a bad mood. I don't feel comfortable going to dinner with my friends with you tonight because you're in a bad mood. I will go alone. They'll be upset. How can you do this to me? You're in a bad mood. I don't go and have dinner with my friends with someone who's in a bad mood. You have every right to be in a bad mood, and I have every right to not inflict this upon my friends. I'm very sorry, we'll talk about it tomorrow. You have every right to be upset. You can be upset, we'll talk about it tomorrow. I'm late, I'm sorry. Now there's a second level of protection that you can use. Of course, when you explain that you're becoming neutral because of their disruption or their tension, they're not going to like it. So one strategy that can work nicely to prevent this is whenever there's a disruption, you try to understand what is going on. Take this back into the sequence. There's a disruption that occurs around here, such as they bring up a topic just before you arrive for dinner. Start asking questions. Why did you decide to talk about this topic now? This seemed like an important time for you. Let's talk about this. The timing, because I might say, you don't want to talk about the topic. So it's not that I don't want to talk about it. The timing is the problem. The timing might be the problem. The tone might be the problem. And another problem that occurs really often is you believe that there's closure and they bring it up again. So you have to address this. Is there closure or not? If there is closure, good. Then it shouldn't occur again. People can make a mistake, believe there's closure, but want to bring it up again. Now, it's really important when you do this. If you want there to be closure, you have to make sure the other person actually feels that there is closure. Asking them, for example, is this a problem? Is a manipulation technique, because it's hard to say, yes, it's a problem. It's much better to say, is there anything else you'd like to talk about this? Or, if there's anything else that's on your mind, would it be okay to tell me about it? But then it's about getting the timing right. Just before you go to dinner is not the right timing. Just before someone goes on holiday is not the right timing. The night before an important presentation at work is not the right timing. Remember, the timing is important. Narcissists will use any kind of misunderstanding to drop a bomb exactly when it hurts the most. The timing must be addressed. Quite often, it's not about what they're talking about. It can be about how they're talking about it, but especially the timing. They time for maximum damage. You must observe this, look for the patterns. So to summarize, look for the disruptions, look to see how it works with the closure, look for your knee-jerk reaction, recognize your tense behavior and try to replace it by neutral behavior. If you're stuck in these situations, it can be very, very hard to see the forest for the trees. And that's one of the goals, is to keep you confused so that you don't take a step back, you don't think, you don't gain autonomy. Try to use this to gain a bit more headspace, figure out what you want so you can take control of your life again and reduce the control that toxic people have over you. It's possible that you've already experienced this and you've found techniques that work for you, sentences that work for you. If you'd like to share that in the comments, I'm sure many people will find it really helpful. Thank you for watching.